Today we're diving into a topic that affects millions: the minimum wage. This is not just a number, it's a lifeline for many. It's the difference between putting food on the table and going hungry, between having a roof over your head and facing homelessness. The federal minimum wage, the bare minimum employers are legally required to pay most workers, currently sits at a measly $7.25 an hour. You heard that right, $7.25. That's not a typo, it's a stark reality for many. It's been stuck there since 2009, a relic of a bygone era. An era where the cost of living was significantly lower and the economic landscape was vastly different. Think back to 2009. The world was a different place. The first iPhone was still a novelty and social media was just beginning to shape our lives. Twitter was still figuring out hashtags, Lady Gaga was dominating the airwaves, and the economy was clawing its way out of a recession. The financial crisis had left many reeling, and the minimum wage was a crucial support for those struggling to get by. It was a different time. Fast forward to today, and the world has changed dramatically. Technology has advanced, the cost of living has skyrocketed, and yet, the minimum wage remains frozen in time. Yet here we are over a decade later, still clinging to a minimum wage that's lost its value faster than a New Year's resolution. Inflation has eroded its purchasing power, making it harder for workers to afford even the basics. This stagnant wage floor has serious consequences for millions of hardworking Americans who are struggling to make ends meet in an increasingly expensive world. Families are forced to make tough choices, often sacrificing essentials like healthcare, education, and even food. It's time we shine a light on this issue and demand better for our fellow citizens. The fight for a fair wage is not just about numbers, it's about dignity, respect, and the right to a decent life. Welcome to Curiosity Chronicles. Remember inflation, that economic buzzword that seems to haunt our wallets? Inflation is the gradual increase in prices over time. It's like a slow leak in your tire. It might not seem like much at first, but eventually, it'll leave you stranded. Now imagine your income staying the same while the cost of everything around you steadily rises. That's the harsh reality for minimum wage earners in America. Since 1968, the federal minimum wage has lost a staggering amount of its purchasing power. What could buy you a week's worth of groceries back then, might only get you a tank of gas today. This erosion of purchasing power means that minimum wage workers are falling further and further behind. They're trapped in a cycle of struggling to afford basic necessities, let alone save for the future or invest in their dreams. It's a recipe for economic instability and a stark reminder that the current minimum wage is simply not enough. Let's talk about the cost of living, that unavoidable beast that seems to grow larger every year. We're not just talking about avocado toast and fancy lattes here, folks. We're talking about the fundamental things we all need to survive: housing, food, and transportation. Rent prices have skyrocketed across the nation, pushing affordable housing further out of reach for low-wage workers. Groceries have become a luxury for some, with families forced to choose between putting food on the table and paying for other essentials. And don't even get me started on the cost of gas, car repairs, or public transportation. For minimum wage earners, these rising costs are like a boa constrictor slowly squeezing the life out of their budgets. They're forced to make impossible choices every day, sacrificing their health, well-being, and future prospects just to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. This is not the American dream, it's an American nightmare. Let's talk about the poverty line, that invisible line that separates those who have enough from those who are struggling to survive. It's a harsh reality that many people face every single day, and it's not just a matter of numbers or statistics. It's about real lives, real families, and real struggles. In the United States, the poverty line is determined by the government based on the minimum income needed to afford basic necessities. This includes things like food, shelter, clothing, and healthcare. But what happens when the cost of living rises and wages don't keep up? The gap between the rich and the poor widens, and more people find themselves slipping below that line. Now here's a depressing thought. A full-time worker earning the federal minimum wage working 40 hours a week earns a paltry $15,080 per year. That's before taxes, mind you. After taxes, the amount is even less, making it nearly impossible to cover all the basic needs. Let me repeat that. $15,080 per year. Imagine trying to live on that amount. It's a constant struggle to make ends meet, and there's no room for any unexpected expenses. That's barely enough to scrape by, let alone live a decent life. Many families are forced to live in cramped, substandard housing because they simply can't afford anything better. The stress and anxiety of not knowing if you'll be able to pay the rent or buy groceries can be overwhelming. It should come as no surprise that millions of minimum wage workers find themselves trapped below the poverty line. They work long hours, often in physically demanding jobs, yet they still can't make ends meet. It's a vicious cycle that's incredibly hard to break. This isn't just a statistic, it's a human tragedy. It's about people who are doing everything they can to survive, yet still find themselves falling short. It's about the emotional toll it takes on individuals and families. It means families struggling to put food on the table, often having to rely on food banks and other forms of assistance just to get by. The constant worry about where the next meal will come from is a heavy burden to bear. Children going to bed hungry, their growth and development stunted by a lack of proper nutrition. It's heartbreaking to think about the long-term effects this can have on their futures, and parents working multiple jobs just to keep their heads above water. They sacrifice time with their families, their health, and their well-being, all in an effort to provide for their loved ones. The current minimum wage is failing to provide a living wage, leaving millions trapped in a cycle of poverty. It's clear that something needs to change. We need to advocate for higher wages, better working conditions, and more support for those who are struggling. Only then can we hope to lift people out of poverty and give them a chance at a better life. The consequences of a low minimum wage extend far beyond the individuals and families directly affected. It's like a domino effect, rippling through our communities and the economy as a whole. When people are struggling to make ends meet, they're more likely to rely on public assistance programs like food stamps and Medicaid. These programs are essential safety nets, but they shouldn't be propping up an economy built on low wages. So what I'm saying is, your tax dollars are covering the cost of these benefits in the form of government assistance. Not the employers, who are worth billions of dollars, but are far too greedy to pay their workforce a fair living wage. A higher minimum wage would lift millions out of poverty, reducing the strain on these vital programs. Furthermore, low wages lead to reduced consumer spending, which in turn hampers economic growth. When people don't have money to spend, businesses suffer, jobs are lost, and the entire economy takes a hit. It's a vicious cycle that benefits no one. Now let's talk about tipped workers. Those hardworking souls in restaurants, bars, and other service industries who rely on tips to supplement their meager wages. These individuals often work long hours, dealing with demanding customers and fast-paced environments, all while trying to make ends meet. Their base pay is shockingly low, and they depend heavily on the generosity of patrons to earn a livable income. Under federal law, employers can pay tipped workers a sub-minimum wage as low as $2.13 an hour, as long as tips bring their earnings up to the regular minimum wage. This means that if tips are insufficient, the employer is supposed to make up the difference. However, this system is far from perfect, and often fails to protect workers adequately. The reality is that many tipped workers end up earning far less than the minimum wage due to inconsistent tipping, and unscrupulous employers who fail to make up the shortfall. This leaves workers in a precarious financial situation, constantly worried about their next paycheck. This system, known as the tipped minimum wage, is riddled with problems, and often leaves tipped workers vulnerable to exploitation and poverty. Many workers report being pressured to work off the clock, share tips with non-tipped staff, or endure harassment from customers and management, all while trying to earn enough to survive. Tips can be unpredictable, fluctuating based on factors beyond the worker's control, such as weather, time of day, and the generosity, or lack thereof, of customers. A rainy day or a slow shift can mean the difference between paying rent or not. This instability makes it incredibly difficult for tipped workers to plan their finances or achieve any sense of economic security. The One Fair Wage movement seeks to eliminate the tipped minimum wage and ensure that all workers, regardless of industry or whether they receive tips, are entitled to the full minimum wage. This movement advocates for fair pay, arguing that no one should have to rely on the whims of customers to earn a decent living. By guaranteeing a stable base wage, workers can have more predictable incomes and better job security. It's a matter of fairness, dignity, and ensuring that all workers have a fair shot at a decent living. By supporting initiatives like One Fair Wage, we can help create a more just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of their job or reliance on tips. Let's stand together to support our tipped workers and push for the changes they so desperately need. Don't just take my word for it. Several states have already taken the plunge and eliminated the tipped minimum wage, requiring all employers to pay their workers the full minimum wage, tips on top. And guess what? The sky hasn't fallen. In fact, these states have often seen positive results. For example, in states like California and Washington, eliminating the tipped minimum wage has been linked to lower poverty rates among tipped workers, increased restaurant industry growth, and improved overall economic conditions. It's a win-win situation for workers, businesses, and the economy as a whole. These success stories demonstrate that a fair wage is not only morally right, but also economically sound. It's time for the rest of the country to catch up and embrace a system that values the hard work and contributions of all workers. The evidence is clear. The current federal minimum wage is failing American workers. It's time for a national raise and not just a paltry increase that barely keeps pace with inflation. We need a bold and substantial increase that reflects the true cost of living and provides a pathway out of poverty for millions. Raising the federal minimum wage would boost the economy, reduce income inequality, and improve the lives of millions of hardworking Americans. It's a common-sense solution that has been long overdue. Furthermore, it's time to abolish the outdated and exploitative tipped minimum wage system. All workers deserve a fair wage regardless of their industry or whether they receive tips. Let's create a system that values all work and ensures that everyone who contributes to our economy is rewarded fairly. This isn't just a problem for economists and policymakers to solve, it's a moral imperative that requires all of us to raise our voices and demand better for our fellow citizens. Contact your elected officials and tell them that you support a living wage for all workers. Support organizations fighting for fair wage policies. Educate yourself and others about the issue. Every voice matters, and together, we can create a groundswell of support that cannot be ignored. Let's make a difference and build an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. The fight for a fair wage is about more than just dollars and cents. It's about justice, dignity, and the fundamental belief that everyone who works hard deserves a fair shot at a decent life. It's about ensuring that no one is left behind in the pursuit of the American dream. Let's reject the notion that some jobs are simply not worth a living wage. Let's recognize the inherent dignity of all work and the contributions of every worker, regardless of their profession or income level. It's time for America to live up to its ideals and create an economy that works for everyone. Together, let's raise the wage, raise our voices, and raise the bar for economic justice in America. The time for action is now. If you found this video informative, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. We'll see you next time.